Okay, welcome everyone back to our webinar series, back on Zoom this week. We're really happy to have Tisalia here. Tisalia is an associate professor at Georgetown, both in public policy and also the Massive Data Institute. And also she's a senior fellow at the Election Integrity Project. Her research examines how institutional administrative roles shape voter access and voter experience. And she has written a really interesting book about the administration of voter registration, which is of course important topic. What she's going to talk today about is the election officials' communication tracker. I'm really excited about this to allow us, analyzing and tracking social media communications by state and local officials, especially focused on the I think the 2024 election. As always with this webinar, first Tisalia will have the floor to give her presentation. If you have any questions about her presentation and her research, please just use the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of the screen. And then we're going to pick this up at the end and ask Tisalia all your questions. Okay, so over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Hi, everyone. As Anja talked about, I'm a political scientist. I currently work at Georgetown University at the McCourt School of Public Policy. I have, let's see, why is it moving? Okay. I have structured my presentation to go over first some of the background and why I'm interested in this research. I find it useful when sometimes the audience is not from the US. It's helpful to provide some context as to the complexity of the institutions that I aim to study and some of the questions that drive my research, because it's theory driven and question driven. So the United States is very complex administratively and institutionally, aside from what is happening right now. It has a complex infrastructure of elections. Elections are run at the state level and at the local level. There are thousands of jurisdictions that are regulating elections. There are policy around elections and how elections should run and who should be eligible to participate, register to vote, vote by specific method is run at the state and local levels. And this variation, unsurprisingly, results in very diverse voter experiences, from how one casts their vote to whether their vote is counted, to what recourse a voter has to resolve issues with their ballot, and of course, attitudes about the election process and confidence that the election process is run fairly and freely. Substantive questions that drive my research have to do with how election policy is designed, how it affects the administration of elections, and how the administration of election in itself impacts access to voting and increases, decreases, or neutralizes barriers to participation. And relevant to the discussion that we're going to have today, how those policy design, administration, voter access kind of shape attitudes about the election process, and how they build or break the resilience of the electorate insofar as being vulnerable to misinformation and narratives about stolen, rigged elections. So the substantive question that centers around this research project has to do with communications, particularly election officials in the United States. And the theoretical grounding is what role they play in improving the quality of democratic listening. And democratic listening is very intentional here in the context of elections and election officials. As we all know, information disorder has left voters vulnerable to misinformation, and familiarity with how elections are run in someone's jurisdiction and state and in other states makes it more prone to be responsive to narratives that there is misconduct in your jurisdiction or in other jurisdictions. And we observe tangible impacts on the discourse around elections and how individuals behave and how the public discusses issues around elections, which we argue that are signs of decreasing quality of democratic listening, particularly in the context of recent elections in the United States, which are very secure and run very, very well. declining confidence in election integrity, that votes cast are counted accurately, persistence of election denial maintained by elites, and of course, increased harassment and threats towards election officials who are the ones that are securing the election process. So those phenomena are concerning, and we consider them evidence of this decline in democratic listening. And the question is, how do we bring it back up? The role of election officials in building what we call a healthy information ecosystem is very intentional, again, because they play a central role in the infrastructure. They are the election process experts. They run elections. They are statutorily required to do this job. They are committed to running safe, secure, and free elections. They are the authoritative source for reliable and accurate information. And they interact, particularly local election officials, they are the key point of contact for the public. They interact with voters on a regular basis in different capacities. And voter education, informing voters about what is needed to vote, how election procedures are run, where to vote, and conducting outreach to different communities, both online and offline, is a core part of their work. So the theoretical foundation for this research, again, is centered around deliberative democracy. We center election officials at the core because they are the process experts in the system. And we have research with my collaborators that their outreach and communication efforts have distinct impacts on the voter experience, broadly defined. First, communication efforts and outreach have educative effects. They help voters understand how elections work. They help them navigate complex procedures more successfully, from submitting a registration application that will be validated, and therefore they will be able to participate in the process, to submitting a mail ballot application that will be processed successfully and cast a valid ballot. So we have evidence of those educative effects. We also have evidence that those communications from election officials around election integrity, what we describe as trust building, they have a positive impact on shaping attitudes about election security and election integrity. And of course, we consider those attitudes, positive attitudes around the election process and election security, stemming from those communications as evidence of democratic listening, that voters pay attention, and when they're exposed to these messages, and despite their positive or negative voter experience, they will be more resilient to false narratives or maybe bitterness when their candidate does not win an election, and express confidence in vote counting despite negative feelings about who won or a negative voter experience. So how do we get from this theoretical background to measuring voter education and testing the impact of voter education on the voter experience? Voter education, as other terms in social sciences like democracy and war, are very vague. We have a common understanding of what it entails, but actually capturing that and operationalize that is a little bit more complicated. And another difficulty in a concept like voter education, at least in the context of the United States, is that there's no centralized management body that educates voters. There's no centralized database of voter education activities. So defining that concept and measuring it and collecting data is very complicated and challenging. So, and also in the context of the United States, when election administration is so decentralized, it is very difficult to produce a research design where we just ask election officials, what do you do? How do you educate voters? It's very invasive. So in the context of this, we started this research in 2020 during the first COVID wave and the lockdowns, which made it very, very obvious that face-to-face interaction is not happening for some time, but voters still have to be informed. Election officials have to prepare for a major election cycle in 2020. How do they do this job? Let's focus on social media for a while. So that's how we got started. And we consider social media as a useful starting point, not surprisingly for the group here, because it is a way to systematically observe how election officials communicate with voters in digital spaces. It's the least invasive way. Election officials are very busy people. They run elections. They don't have time, oftentimes, to respond to questions. So it is a way to be mindful of the community we study, and particularly during a major election cycle. So the strategy for measuring voter education in the context of digital spaces during an election cycle is, first we have to map the digital footprint, where election officials are present and where they are not, and which platforms they are present in their official capacity as election officials, not as candidates. Observe their information sharing patterns within those networks, identify key messaging strategies and delivery methods, and of course, assess whether those communication efforts move the needle in improving the voter experience, no matter how we define it. In our context of our research, we care very deeply about voter confidence. The way we measure that is expressing confidence that votes cast are counted as intended. So the goal of the election officials communications tracker, which is what we coined, we launched it in 2020. We refined it in 2022, and we ran it again in 2024. Our goal has been to understand primarily how election officials combat misinformation, both pre-bunking and debunking, and how they build trust in election integrity and overall the election administration process and election officials themselves. And the way we do it is we track and analyze social media communications shared by election officials during a major election cycle, particularly during the 3 months before election day, where activity is very high, voters are more attuned, and a lot of information sharing takes place with regards to registering to vote, requesting a mail ballot, conducting voter registration drives, voting early, in person, counting, auditing ballots, certifying votes. Aside from peer review research, which is obviously something that we do as academics, the priority has been to produce public-facing output so that this information is shared and disseminated and also used by the community it aims to serve. A dynamic data set of voter communications, data analytics of election officials, communication toolkits for election officials and other stakeholders, and a public-facing dashboard for the public broadly to be able to interact and use the data for their own research or other things that they're interested in doing with the data. So setting up the data collection, that was the key consideration that we were facing, particularly in 2022, was what do we mean by election official? What are the entities that we're aiming to study? And in the context of the U.S., we have every state and U.S. territories, but we're focusing on the U.S. states, and D.C. For now. Has a chief election officials, that's usually the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, or an elections commission. So that's a chief election official authority. And then we have over 6,000 local election jurisdictions where elections are run by either an election official or a combination of authorities that can have a single responsibility of running elections, or they have shared responsibilities of doing jury duty and taxes and different kind of activities, including elections. So thinking about who is the entity that we track and what unit of analysis we are focusing on was one of the first considerations. We opted to study the locality as the unit of analysis, meaning who are the authorities that are running elections in a specific jurisdiction, and who is the centralized authority that communicates about election processes in a specific jurisdiction. So that was the easiest way to approach this project, instead of focusing on who are those individuals and finding their personal information, which is not what we study. We study officials, not candidates. And then building a database of state and local election official social media accounts. So whether there is a website, and whether social media are communicated on that website so that we can surface them, or using different strategies to surface the social media accounts, and being very mindful about separating the official account versus an account that is run by an election official who is also using it when they run for office, which is not what we want to capture. And another consideration was, how do we classify content? What are some of the code book, let's say, that we want to apply to classify and organize thematically communications, and what are we prioritizing when it comes to being able to study misinformation campaigns and trust building campaigns, which was the priority for this research project. Just to give you an overview or an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the presence of local election officials in this case, as I said, we have over 6,000, and in other counts, we have about 8,000 local election jurisdictions that are run at the county, at the city, at the municipal level. So surfacing social media accounts on mainstream platforms for those has been a rather challenging concept and endeavor. We started manually. Now we're optimizing that process with more with LLMs and manual verification. This map shows the variation in the social media presence of local election officials during the 2024 cycle. On 3 mainstream platforms, we track more than those. The pink ones show presence in all 3, Facebook, X, and Instagram in 2024. The white ones show no social media presence at all. The gray ones are jurisdictions that we're not yet tracking, but we're still collecting data because the elections are run at the very different jurisdiction level. So we're still trying to navigate that. The takeaway is that election officials are not always present on social media. That doesn't mean they don't inform voters, but this is one of the key ways that we're able to document and understand communication patterns and other activities that election officials do, which they communicate on social media. As I said before, for this project, that entails social media tracking. Of course, it entails funding. We were lucky that we got funding in 2022 by MIT, 2024 by Public Agenda, and we partnered with the National Conference on Citizenship. I'm not sure how many are familiar with this organization. It's nonprofit, nonpartisan. They have a project called Algorithmic Transparency Institute and a tool that they call Junkipedia. It's a social listening platform. It allows us to track communications. So we have been partnering with NCOC since 2022, and we're still working together. So this collaboration involves those partners. I will show what the platform looks like, but just of an overview of what we can do in Junkipedia. Junkipedia allows us to create what we call actor sets. So those are the entities that we want to follow. In our case, those are the US election officials. We can, after we have collected their social media accounts, we can upload them into the platform, and that enables automatic and historical tracking of social media, organic social media communications, so not paid ads. We don't track those. We are able to build custom tracking and analysis projects. In our case, in 2022, it was a 2022 comms tracker, 2024 comms tracker. We can build an in-platform labeling codebook that we can use to classify content thematically. We can, of course, export raw data and metadata like engagement and media and images and videos, and create custom dashboards for interactive visualization of communications. On the back end, something that we're doing is we're updating our list in a dynamic manner. So we have this Airtable base for different entities, and we are constantly resurfacing and verifying information like new accounts, inactive accounts, with different platforms emerging like Blue Sky and Threads. We are updating our information, and that is dynamically synced with the platform. So we are immediately able to track new content as we are surfacing new social media accounts. But this allows us to be more dynamic with our data collection, particularly local election officials. And we have other indicators that we are including, specifically those geographic characteristics like the FIPS code that we have, the census geographic identifiers that allow us to use the data in a more meaningful way and then merge this data with other databases. So FIPS is a very important indicator in our case. So I will stop this. I guess, let's see if there's another way for me to show you. Where is my, okay. So are you able to see, if you can do a thumbs up that you can see my,
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to be, instead of telling you, I would like to show you a little bit more about the platform before I move up to the next part of my presentation. So this is the interface of the Junkipedia platform. When you sign up, it takes you to the monitoring page. This is everything that is currently displayed on the platform. If you look on the bottom left where I have my little mouse, you'll see my name. This is my account. We are setting up the project. This is the communications tracker for 2024. And I will show you the dashboard in a little bit. The platform enables a keyword search. You can do Boolean search that way. So you can, if you want to do election fraud, then you can filter with a keyword search. There are different platforms that Junkipedia tracks right now. Another complication that we faced when we were setting up the project in 2024 was CrowdTangle being discontinued, and that made it very difficult created a challenge for platforms like Junkipedia and researchers to systematically collect content from APIs. Because of CrowdTangle, it was so useful. So you will notice here there are some platforms that are called Facebook Direct and Instagram Direct. Those are different APIs that Junkipedia experimented with to maintain the data collection process during that period of time when CrowdTangle was discontinued, because we were already collecting content during that time. Junkipedia also allows us to customize the timeline that we are focusing on and do a more custom timeline set for tracking purposes. And relevant to our project, we have been able to create those actor sets that I said before, based on the databases that we built. And for our purposes, the US election officials is the actor set that we are working with. So when I select that, obviously the interface will be very different, and immediately Junkipedia displays communications by accounts in this actor set, state and local election officials, in the last 7 days. So this is the most recent one. So you will notice county circuit clerks, Dallas, that's Texas. Then it also allows us to expand on our search, and this is usually what we do for a tracking purpose. We go to actor set attributes. Those are characteristics that we have included in our data set to better organize our tracking purposes. So we can filter by county or the official type, or by state. By official type, we mean state or local. By state, we can filter with specific states. So I suppose for the purposes of this display, we had elections in New York last week. So we can filter by specific states, and we can do more customized little research projects if we're interested in that. Then I wanted to show you what the process looks for our project in 2024. This is a custom set that my team was looking at when it came to codifying and organizing communications by election officials in 2024. Thus, there is a specific label mode that we use. This set is labeled. That's why it shows like this. The red labels here are the ones that coders are applying when they process communications on the platform. If we are to change the settings and add labels, this is what it looks like. Coders are looking at a post. There are a specific series of labels. Let's see if I can show you something that is unlabeled by me so that you can see what it looks like. So every coder assigned a specific set within the same corpus of social media posts that we want to label. They are seeing the post and they are applying different types of labels. So clicking a label means that there's the presence of a specific theme. And we try to capture different types of communications, from whether there's an election deadline being communicated, to the presence of links and alternative text, whether specific campaigns are being followed that we are tracking from national partners or state partners. Relevant to our research project is the trust building communications that we have identified through observations and communications with election officials, communications that are aimed to tell voters that election officials are your trusted source of information, which we call trusted source. Communications about how election procedures are kept safe and secure, we call that trusted process. And information about how election officials, the humans that run elections, are professionals, they are trained, they conduct work on a bipartisan basis, we call that trust the people. And we included election office tours because there was a specific intervention that was integrated in 2024 as another way to bring voters into the process and build trust and confidence that elections are run safe and securely. Let me go back to my slides. Okay. And I'm more than happy to show more when we have the Q&A. So in practice, we're tracking specific type of content. In 2024, one of the major things that we were tracking, and unsurprisingly for those who study elections in the United States, there's always a weather emergency, particularly in states like Florida. In 2024, North Carolina was impacted, Florida, Georgia was impacted. So we're trying to also capture rapid response, and particularly stepping in to communicate to voters efforts to change polling locations, or that voting operations are still being done, and address any misinformation around election processes. So we're able to capture that in a very dynamic manner with this research project. As I said, the tracker allows us to be more dynamic with what we collect and how we visualize. This is a very generic way, but a very instructive way to visualize the flow of communications over time. The top part is the state election officials' activity across different platforms that we track. And the bottom is the local election officials. Immediately, we are able to see which platforms are more preferred by election officials. Facebook is the platform of preference for locals. X is a platform that state election officials used more in 2024. There are different dynamics now with X being captured with a different ideological dynamics there that we're still observing. Very limited use of TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and Threads has been a very new platform compared to the others. But X and Facebook are the ones where we see a lot of activity. We're also seeing a lot of fluctuation over time, particularly around critical dates like voter registration deadlines, early voting deadlines, election day, and also post-election, when election officials really ramp up their communications about what happens after election day, how votes are counted, what is the difference between election night results, unofficial results, certified results, audits. There's a lot of communication around those processes that we observe, and we track communications up to December 15th, which is usually when locals and state election officials are certifying election results. So I will briefly go over, so that I want to make sure I'm on time, with key findings and next steps. We have a very basic website where we try to put all the information around this project. We have different briefs where we talk about observations, very descriptive observations around communications patterns and how election officials try to establish themselves as authoritative sources by building brand identity, by partnering with different stakeholders, by conducting outreach, by doing media. So how they build their brand and how they do this public-facing work. In the context of the election administration in the United States, this is not something that election officials have been trained to do. They were not meant to be public faces. They were doing their job in the background. But recent developments in elections, particularly after 2016, made it very clear that they have to take that public-facing role to be communicators. So it is highly interesting to understand what capacity they have, how they do this job, and what needs they meet, and whether they do a good job in addressing those misconceptions or any type of inquiries around election procedures. Top line observations from the 2024 cycle, a lot of similarities from 2022. Election officials, what they changed based on 2022, they emphasized process more. Communications moved away from trust as we know what we're doing to this is how we do the work, and this is why your vote is secured and your vote is counted as intended. Several references on election code that all of these procedures that we follow are codified in our statutes, that we follow the law. Leaning in on bipartisanship as a strategy to diffuse polarized attitudes about election administration. The idea that election officials are elected, many elected in partisan races. How can they navigate, how can they run non-partisan elections when they are themselves partisan and they perhaps inherently want to benefit their party? So a relevant communication strategy, and a very intentional one, was how many of those processes that we have in elections in the United States rely on those bipartisan checks and balances, that election officials, election workers from different parties, they work together to secure the election process. We also identified very robust pre-banking efforts. That's a continuation from all those efforts that were launched in 2020, myth-busting pages, a lot of pre-banking communications about very common items that we see, like non-citizens voting, machines connected to the internet, poll workers marking ballots and what that means. We also, apologize for the typo, we also observed very crisis response communications, very robust. A lot of signs about the resiliency of the election infrastructure as we describe it. Unsurprisingly, very highly variable activity among local election officials. There were local election officials that were highly active and responsive. There were many jurisdictions where we lacked communications at all. Of course, we can connect those to outcomes, but for now, we're focusing on the description part of it. We also are able to identify persistent challenges like content accessibility. That is still an issue, from providing information in different languages for language minority voters to providing alt text and clickable links, information that is actually accessible by different audience who have distinct needs. We also were able to observe different types of innovations in 2024 that bring forth alternative and additional research questions and research designs. We identified exploration of generative AI among election officials, producing visuals, producing audio, communications, of course, not disclosed, which is something that we're working on right now on how to best navigate that environment. Strong efforts to build a brand identity that is recognizable and distinct from other jurisdictions and states and memorable for voters so that they can associate that brand with their election office. We were able to observe very robust efforts, although very spotty across the nation, to communicate and connect with voters online and offline in different communities. So building that community and those trusted messengers on the ground for elections. And the biggest challenge that we observed, and we're still trying to figure it out, and I'm sure many of you doing this work, is navigating complex algorithmic architectures that do not prioritize high quality content and make it very difficult for voters to get actually exposed to that information. So the biggest question election officials grapple with is, I am active on social media, I don't have a lot of followers, or there's no reach, right? What is my reach? What is the point of me having or investing all these resources in, building a brand and communicating when nobody's following the content? So that is a constant challenge. And in addition to that, the quality of the content that voters, then the public is exposed to, and what implications that has for the ability of election officials to break through the noise and build that health information infrastructure. So, I don't know why that. Okay, so the next steps in this project is to optimize the labeling process. I didn't speak a lot about this in terms of how we do that. It is manual, and the reason why we emphasized manual labeling on the platform is because we were still figuring out what we want to track, but also there's a lot of context to these communications that we felt that automatic labeling will not accurately capture because we tried. So it's not just a merely keyword label. But we recognize that this is a very labor-intensive work. So now we're exploring different strategies, what content we want to label manually and what content we want to optimize and automatically label with different tools. We are working on building analytics for election officials, particularly how they use communications and different toolkits from different partners. So we're building those classification tools right now. Our goal is to build an interactive dashboard that users can interact with, but also export data and use them for their analysis. And what, of course, we're working right now is we're testing those messages experimentally. We have a very unique database of actual communications. And what we offer and we try to do is to test those actual communications for effectiveness versus experimental interventions that design those artificial messages and test them. So we want to be able to leverage those real life messages and build some external validity to those experimental interventions that other researchers, including us, are testing on the ground. And of course, we want to secure funds to do this work because it is very difficult to run this project and hire students if you don't have the funds. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. this is my presentation. Before I stop, I know I have a few more minutes. I want to show what the dashboard looks like so that you can get some understanding of the basic of what we try to do. And that is through the Junkipedia platform, but we hope to do a customized dashboard. So Junkipedia allows us to visualize our data in a very different way. For these purposes, we have built what we call a beta version of our dashboard, where we basically load our data and we select what features we want to visualize. This is it's a dynamic but also static dashboard because it is time limited. It captures those communications between August 28th and December 15th, which is the time period that we use for the 2024 project. And users can navigate through those features here by a keyword, by platform, by labels, and sort through our already labeled content, and they can see they can get an understanding or a comparative understanding of how election officials in different jurisdictions communicate. They can export that content, not directly, I guess, because we don't have a CSV export enabled at the moment. Something that we have heard from election officials is that they have been using this dashboard to better understand how others communicate and get some ideas. So we have heard anecdotally that it is helpful, but we also know that the biggest value of dashboards like that, like with the folks from Toronto, the University of Toronto showed a couple of weeks ago, is that other researchers having the ability to use the data, export it, and merge it with other data sets, or use it in a more meaningful manner other than just visualizing it on a website. That's what I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tesalia. So we have, a few people here in the room. Feel free to put your questions into the Q&A function so that we can, find out more about this very exciting project. So maybe then I just, kick off a few questions. So first of all, this is a fantastic tool, and I think you provided a really interesting and also important application by focusing on voter education by these key actors of election officials. But kind of maybe you can give us some other ideas, like have you built it purposely for this group, or how would other researchers, because the group here is kind of, they come together mostly because they want to kind of learn these different tools of how to use social media. So I think that's really interesting to kind of get to know Junkipedia a bit more. So how would we use this in different ways, kind of, for example, having like different actor sets.
Yes.
How would we do this? So maybe you can just give us some ideas, not necessarily you give us your ideas of like, but how would we kind of use this with kind of different things. And also we have a lot of people from like mostly, of course, Europe and North America, but we always have people also from other parts of the world. Is this something that focuses mainly on the US, or would it also be extendable to study this elsewhere?
Great questions. Thank you. So I will say that one of the great things about working with a nonprofit and building that long-term relationship is that the platform, as the platform evolves and responds to researchers' needs. I will say that Junkipedia and the National Conference on Citizenship works with several different academic and practitioner groups across the world. For any of you who are familiar with the Carter Center and their observation work that they do in different countries, including the US. They work with the Carter Center. They work with researchers across the world. They do social media tracking projects for different types of actors. So for this specific interface that I see, because I'm limited to what I can see because there's so many different users, the actor sets that you'll see here, they're US politicians, state and federal. What we're working on right now with this partner is we're expanding our databases and tracking projects for public health officials and emergency responders. The Junkipedia was built, one of the first projects that it worked on was greenwashing, climate change. So there are all these different actor sets that someone can put together. So if you're interested in anything that has to do with social media communication that you might be interested in, you can build an actor set and study that. From journalism to sports teams to, I don't know, actors, whatever, different types of entities that you might be interested in, you can do that with Junkipedia. And researchers can build those custom projects. You don't have to do labeling, you can just do the tracking, but labeling is helpful sometimes. So anywhere you are, you can do that work. Did I
Great.
answer all of your questions?
So for the moment, it is not cross-national. It would be
No,
for...
it is. It is.
Ah,
It
okay.
is. You can. Yeah. They do work with different partners across the world. So
Yeah.
if you want to leverage this platform to do any tracking project for your specific actors, yes, you can do that. So I'm more than
Yeah.
happy to connect you with with the folks over at the National Conference on Citizenship so that you can do that
Yeah.
work.
So the idea is that researchers build their actor pool
Yeah.
in terms of just having the complete list of the
Yes.
actors that they're tracking, which sites they're on, and so on, and then
Yes.
that can be uploaded on
Yes.
Junkipedia, and then from
Yeah.
there you're in the platform and can work from there.
Correct. There are two ways that you can do that. One, that's something that we did the first round in 2022. We built a list. So we had our list and we can update them. So on the left-hand side, if you see here, I have, you can click on the list and you can upload your specific list with which is essentially the same thing as the actor set. So anything that you want to track, you can do that. So the platform will grant you access. Something that I want to say is that we have an annual subscription. So Junkipedia charges $25,000 for this service, and you have unlimited access to any feature on the platform. So that's not uncommon with different types of platforms like this that do this kind of work to have the subscription model. You also get access to all of the technical team, and that's something that's a bonus. Like we have a Slack channel and we ask them questions all the time, and they resolve everything all the time. So that's a great customer experience.
Sorry, so you said $25,000. So
Yes, a year.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is, I guess, why we need funding.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we probably answered Jacob's question, who asked about, kind of following German election campaigns, and I bet, Jacob, if you want to come in with, if anything hasn't been answered, but my understanding is that it would be on you to build the actor set and then upload it.
It would be on you, yeah. So that's not, yes. So building a database of who is the entity you want to follow, and that's where there's a little bit of, how the researcher sets up that research project. Because in our case, we build it around the jurisdiction rather than the entity, like the individual person who is an election official. So if you want to track the election commission in Germany, or the federal, every jurisdiction's election official, different kind of entities, you can do that. What is very cool, I argue, about this platform is that as we are building our databases of the actors, we have those specific attributes that we want to attach to a specific entity or an actor. In our case, we wanted to make those comparisons by state and county and type of jurisdiction. The officials, the public politicians database has, gender and partisanship and tenure. So you can have those attributes, what we call them, and you can organize your tracking project and your analysis project around those attributes. So there are many different pieces of information that are relevant for research that you can integrate into that project in Junkipedia.
Okay. Okay. Jacob, I assume we answered your question. Okay, great. Are there any further question for Tesalia? No? Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's a great introduction to see how this tool can be used, applying it to your specific, substantive research question, and hopefully, like people attending and who will watch the video later, maybe, kind of will be inspired and then can, start looking into this and looking for the money to pay, of course, the subscription.
I will say that I do have a subscription for this year, and if anyone wants to explore or is interested in doing research on elections students or any public officials comparatively. I'm very interested in that. So we can discuss, building a little project together, and you can get an idea of how it works. So please reach out to me if you're interested in exploring, the collaboration, but also how to use the platform. I'm more than happy to talk more.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks very much for that offer. Okay, I guess if there are no more questions on this, I will just wrap it up here. This was the last session of our autumn webinar series. We hope to put together more webinars for the spring again. But, this is a community. We do still have quite a few people who are subscribe to our mailing list and who attend the webinar. So please do reach out if you have any exciting research that, what Tisaya just presented. We are always open to either kind of more applied work, what we just saw, or sometimes more methodological work, such as, what Anna presented last week. So please do reach out, and we hope to be back then in the spring. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tisaya, for your great presentation.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.